and I want to just read. I'm very excited to have her here. She is a food activist behind foodbabe.com, and she's a multiple New York Times best-selling author. In fact, you should have gotten one of her books on the way in. She'll be in the back as we're eating if you want her to sign your book. She's the founder of the organic products brand Vani. You should also be familiar with that by now. We hopefully gave you a Vani bar on the way in. And she was named one of the most influential people on the internet by Time magazine. Her viral testimony before the US Senate sparked a massive movement to stop American food companies from poisoning us with ingredients that are not used in other countries. She founded FoodBabe to spread information about what is really in the American food supply. And she teaches people how to make the right purchasing decisions at the grocery store, how to live an organic lifestyle, and how to travel healthfully around the world. She's gathered hundreds of thousands of petitions to change the food system and has influenced on her own how major food giants like Kraft and Subway and Chipotle and Chick-fil-A and Starbucks create their products. And she steers them towards more healthful policies. So I'm very pleased. Let's give a warm welcome to Vani Hari.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to start with a little story. A couple months ago in March, I got a phone call on Sunday, and it was about 9:30 p.m. I said, "You could be calling me on 9:30 p.m. on a Sunday." It was the head of the FDA, Dr. Marty McCary. And I thought to myself, oh boy, either I'm in big trouble, or I did something really bad, or there's some terrible news. I had no idea what he was about to tell me. And when I answered the phone call, he said, "Hi, Vani." He said, "Hi, Dr. McCary, how are you doing today? Great to hear from you." And he said, "Vani, we're doing it." I said, "Really? We're doing it?" And I didn't even have to ask him what he was doing, because a few months earlier, I started to meditate. And during my meditation, I was doing this 15-minute long meditation called, what's it called? It's called Priming by Tony Robbins. You can look it up on YouTube. And he takes you through these different visions. The first section, you think about something that you're super grateful for. I always think about when my children were born in that moment. Like, I'm just so grateful for to bring that feeling in your body. And then towards the end of the meditation, he has you think about something you want done, that you've been trying to accomplish for a really long time, that you want done, and you want to envision it done. And so when I started meditating, I thought about getting artificial food dyes banned from the American food supply, because I'm a food activist, and this is something I've been working on for over a decade. So every day I would do this meditation, and I would think about what it would feel like when we're getting artificial food dyes out of the American food supply. So fast forward to this phone call from Dr. Marty McCary, and he's telling me we're doing it. I was so elated, and when I take you through my journey and my story, you'll understand why this moment was so bizarre. Because I wasn't always friends with the FDA. And the head of the FDA didn't always have my cell phone number and feel free to call me on a Sunday night. You know, I started with two immigrant Indian parents who came here to the United States when they were in the 1960s. My dad came here to study at Purdue University. He got his PhD there. And as he was doing that program, he got summoned back from his mother in India to have an arranged marriage with my mom. He met my mom in a line of women, met her first, just wanted to marry her, knew he wanted to marry her, married her 5 days later, and then whisked her away to the United States on their honeymoon, where she would live for the rest of her life. Never even went back to her house to get her things or anything. She literally got married, came straight to the United States. The first thing he introduced her to was a McDonald's hamburger. He said, if we're gonna live in America, we're gonna eat like Americans. And you know, this was funny because multiple reasons. If you know anything about the Indian culture, you know, the cow is sacred, they don't eat beef, you know, they don't even serve beef, I think, at the McDonald's in India, right? Much less did they even have it at McDonald's back then. But that's how I grew up, on the American processed food diet. I shunned my mother's homemade Indian food, which is my biggest regret, and instead wanted to eat what everybody else around me was eating. And I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we were in the South, there weren't a lot of Indian families, and I just wanted to fit in, and my dad really wanted us to fit in too. He really wanted us to embrace the American culture. And so I ate the Salisbury steak that you put in the microwave. I had the fried Addy out and would throw the mozzarella sticks in. You know, I begged for the hamburger helper and everything that came out of a package or processed good at the grocery store. I ate Little Debbie's as much as I could, right? And as a result, I was a very sick child. But my parents did not make the connection from my sickness to what I was eating. And when I went to the doctors, they didn't ask either. They never asked about what I was eating. All the doctors wanted to do was give me a medication. So by my early 20s, I was on 9 prescription drugs, trying to solve all of these issues that stemmed from food. I got a fancy job right out of college, working for Accenture, a big consulting firm. And again, I was in this situation where I wanted to succeed, I wanted to fit in, and everybody's eating the catered in food for between lunch, breakfast, and dinner so we could bill more hours to the client. We were working as hard as we could. We weren't paying attention to what we were eating. We were just eating to get by. And so they would bring in blueberry muffins and bagels for breakfast, and then at lunch would be a big spread of barbecue with banana pudding at the end, and then at dinner would be Italian and tiramisu and chicken parmesan and all of the heavy processed food from fast food chains as well, like Krispy Kreme in the middle of the night, you know, hot fresh now, because it was the only thing open when we had to work all night to convert these 27 different banks into one. That was my project in financial services. Back then you couldn't cash it, and you guys remember in this room where you couldn't cash a check if you went across state lines, right? Like if you lived in North Carolina and went over to Tennessee, you couldn't cash a check. So I had to go figure that out for these banking systems, and that was my project. We won Project of the Year, but I almost died. I ended up in the hospital with appendicitis, and it was that moment that an organ was getting taken out of my body, that my doctor was telling me that this is an organ you don't need. It's, you know, expendable. It's no big deal. And to me, it was a big deal because it took me weeks to recover from that surgery. And I was wondering, why would a doctor tell you this is no big deal, that my appendix was about to burst, didn't tell me anything about what I was eating or anything that caused it, didn't give me literally gave my parents zero information about why a 22-year-old was getting an organ taken out of their body. Just trust us, we're gonna take this out today and she'll be fine, and she'll live. And so something didn't sit right with me, and because I felt so horrible, and everybody else around me my age was out having fun and a good time, and it was the holidays, and I was sitting in my apartment trying to recover from this surgery, I made a commitment to myself that day. I said I never wanted to feel this way again. And I started to channel this energy that I learned in high school, where I was a top-tier debater, and you guys in this room would also remember this, that, you know, there wasn't Google. So this was over 20 years ago, where you had to look at the microfiche and the law journals and go to law libraries and photocopy evidence and carry it in big tubs to different debate tournaments because you didn't have an iPad, right? And so I really learned how to research, and I did the same thing with my health, where I went to the library and checked out big books on nutrition. And what I found out was, wait a minute, your appendix is actually something you do need. It populates your gut with good bacteria. So I said, well, why didn't the doctors ever tell me that? Or tell me I needed to start taking probiotics, or like pay attention to what I'm eating now that I don't have an appendix? Why didn't anybody ever give me any of this information that I'm learning now just through myself? Aren't these doctors? Are they supposed to tell me, what's going on? And then I started reading more, and then I realized all the food that I'd been eating, all of it, was full of chemicals. Chemicals that had been invented in the last 50 years to improve the bottom line of the food industry, but not improve my health. That the majority of foods in the grocery store shelves were dead foods. Dead, processed foods that had no life left in them and would not nourish your body. And so I made a commitment when I found that out. I said, no more. No more processed foods, no more foods filled with chemicals, and everything changed. I went off every single prescription drug, all 9 of them. I lost weight. I started to feel better than I've ever felt in my life. I became athletic, which I'd never been athletic before, and started to live a life that I never thought was possible. Started to excel at my career, in my friendships, in my relationships. Everything in my life opened up. And so much so that I couldn't shut up and not share what I was learning about the food industry. And so slowly but surely, the people around me, my friends and my family, asked me to start a blog. And I wanted to call it eathealthyliveforever.com. And my husband, who's the tech geek in the family, thought that was a terrible name and nobody would remember it. And so he came up with the name Food Babe about 10 minutes later and bought it off auction. And that is how the Food Babe blog was started. And this was right at the rise of blogs, and when social media was starting, Facebook was starting. And so I used Facebook to share my blog posts. And I was never on Facebook before that, because I thought, well, maybe I want to run for office one day, and I don't want everybody to have all my personal information on the web. And I was really guarded about personal information on the web, so I didn't ever want to share anything on social media, but I had to find a way to share this blog. And what was so beautiful about social media is it allowed you to find a community of people that were like you, that wanted to know more about what they were eating and know the truth about the American food supply. And so I started to share information that I was learning through my investigation. And again, I was still working in the corporate world. I was just doing this for fun and reading about the food industry, reading about the chemicals I was eating, researching it, and then sharing it on blog posts. Well, the day that I shared the 100 ingredients in a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, I called the blog post Chemical Filet or Chick-fil-A. The blog post went viral, so viral that the executive leadership at Chick-fil-A invited me to their headquarters. And suddenly I found myself not only having my mom and my couple friends reading my blog, but a lot more people reading my blog. And now I was going to food corporations, consulting, and telling them what to change and how to get the chemicals out of their food. Shortly thereafter, I had to make a decision whether I wanted to continue being a consultant in the financial world or really become a food activist full time. And so I went on a trip with my husband over the Christmas holiday, and I was on the top of Machu Picchu, and I got a BlackBerry message. This is how long ago it was. I didn't even have an iPhone back then. It was a BlackBerry. And it said, Vani, your consulting contract's coming to end. Do you want to renew it? And I just looked at my husband and I said, no, I don't want to do it. I want to take on the food industry the full time. I want to be a food activist. And I wasn't making any money doing this blog. It was purely for passion. I was just researching and sharing and teaching people about all the different things I was learning. And so my husband, I expected him to say, well, how are we gonna afford the mortgage? What about your 401k? But thankfully, he saw what I had started and the movement that was starting to happen and said to me, what have you been waiting for? This is exactly what you need to be doing. And it was his blessing that gave me the ultimate relief of like, yes, I can do this and quit cold turkey and do this. Now, I didn't tell my Indian parents for a few months because there's no way I would tell them. Not until I could show them I could be successful doing this. So suddenly I end up in my small apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, all surrounded by financial institutions I used to work for. I'm looking down and I see everybody in their blue shirts and khaki pants, somewhat like that guy back there. And everybody's walking around going to work, and suddenly I'm not going to work. And I'm realizing, wow, I have all this time. I can finally do hardcore investigations and research, and it spawned this investigation, which is now the national conversation in Washington at the highest levels of leadership right now. And that is how American food companies are poisoning us with ingredients they don't use in other countries. Me and my husband love to travel. We would travel all over the world before we had kids, and even with kids. And there's one thing that always happened when I traveled. I always felt better eating another country's food. I could eat bread, I could eat pasta, I could eat all kinds of things. They're foods. They're, when I would go out and get something from a cafe, and nothing made me feel the same way as how I do in America, where when I would eat these types of foods, I would feel terrible. And I wondered why. And so I went on a quest to compare common products that are being sold here in the United States and compare those to other products sold in other countries and look at the side-by-side ingredient labels of them. And what I found out was horrifying. I brought some examples here with me today that are current examples, but I'm going to tell you one example that I found that I felt really was just very disheartening because it was something that I thought was healthy. I was eating Quaker oats every single day, and sometimes I'd pick up the strawberries and cream Quaker oats. Especially when I went through my health journey and started to get healthy. My husband introduced oatmeal to me. I had never had oatmeal in my life. And I was like, okay, I can get these pouches. I can just put hot water in them. It's a healthy breakfast. It's better than cereal. But what I found out is Quaker oats, strawberries, and cream here in the United States was artificially dyed, made with petroleum-based red number 40, artificially dyed apple bits to make the strawberries and the strawberries and cream version. Whereas in the UK, they had the same product, but they were using real strawberries. The United States version had other chemicals too, whereas they omitted those in the UK. And I couldn't believe it. I had no idea that our food in America was being systematically poisoned. Food like Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops in Canada, in Australia, in India, in Korea even, all of Europe, doesn't use artificial food dyes made from petroleum. They're using carrot juice and blueberry juice and watermelon juice. But here in the United States, we get the petroleum-based dyes that are linked to hyperactivity in children, cancer, autoimmune disorders, eczema. In the UK, they color their Gatorade with black carrot juice. Here in the United States, it's red number 40 in caramel color level 4, which is a carcinogen. Caramel color level 4 is a substance that they found in such a high amount in Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they had to remove some of it. And you'll find it in all kinds of products. You'll find caramel color level 4 in Cinnamon Toast Crunch here in the United States, but not in other countries. They make Cinnamon Toast Crunch in Australia without artificial dyes, without caramel color level 4, but they put it here in the United States. General Mills does that. Then you have Skittles that uses 10 different artificial dyes here in the United States, and up until recently had titanium dioxide in it, which is banned in Europe because it causes DNA damage. They recently took out titanium dioxide after it was talked about in my Senate testimony last year, and then highlighted in the Maha Commission report that came out back in April. So they have 10 different dyes, but in the UK they just use one. Same thing for M&Ms. Artificial dyes here in the United States, but not in other countries. They're using vegetable and fruit juices. McDonald's French fries. Three ingredients in the UK. Potatoes, canola oil, and a little dextrose. And salt is optional. Here in the United States, it's over 11 ingredients, including dimethyl polysilicoxane, an ingredient that you'd find in silly putty that can be preserved with formaldehyde according to the FDA papers, that has no safety data associated with it because food companies are allowed to use chemicals that don't have safety data in this country. The McDonald's version here in the United States also has TBHQ, an ingredient that you can find to cause autoimmune disorders, can trigger immune response, can make someone who's allergic to something more allergic to it. But that's our McDonald's French fries, right? But the people in Europe get a much cleaner version. So when I was doing this investigation, at the beginning of it, I talked about how our rates of chronic disease in this country are astronomical. Why is it that we spend more on healthcare than any other developing nation, but we have the worst health outcomes? Why is it that our life expectancy is decreasing at an alarming rate compared to every other developing nation? Is it because our food is being poisoned? Is it because our regulatory systems have failed us and allowed these companies to go unregulated? And so this spawned a decade worth of work where I started to take on the food industry full time. The first thing I did was launch a petition against Kraft macaroni and cheese for doing this. They were using paprika and beta carotene in the UK and selling American children yellow 5 and yellow 6, poisoning American children and giving other countries' children better for you ingredients. I felt like it was hypocritical and unethical and it needed to stop. And so I used the most iconic dinner in America as the example. I got 386,000 petitions and delivered those to Kraft headquarters, and they told me basically to get lost. But you know what? I didn't get lost. I kept educating the public, and moms started to make better choices, and they went to their competitor Annie's, who doesn't use artificial food dyes. And you know what happened? Annie's got so popular that they got bought by General Mills for $800 million, and Kraft could no longer hide. They had to change the product. And they did by the end of that year. Then I took on Subway to remove azodicarbonamide, a chemical you find in yoga mats and shoe rubber. Here in the United States, they used it in their bread. You know when you turn a yoga mat sideways and you see those little evenly dispersed air bubbles? Well, this is what the chemical does in bread. Even though it's baked, quote unquote, fresh all over in all the franchises, they want that bread to be so uniform and not full of these bubbles where, you know, if you make bread at home, you know you get those air pockets. And so they were using this chemical that is very hazardous, so hazardous if you get caught using it in other countries, you get fined $450,000 and put in prison. They were using it here in the United States, but not in other countries. And they're also misleading the public by saying you're eating fresh when you're using a yoga mat chemical. And so I started a petition right after Michelle Obama partnered with Subway for her Let's Move campaign. I said, if Michelle Obama doesn't know the truth, I gotta make this, a big deal and to teach everyone about what's happening here. If someone, I sent her a letter. She never responded, but I sent her a letter, and then I started this petition, and thankfully it went so viral and so far-reaching that by the end of 1 week, Subway made the announcement that they were removing this chemical. And not only did Subway remove this chemical, almost every bread manufacturer in America did. And so I continued this work, and I went on and I took on other giants like Starbucks for the pumpkin spice latte. For so long, you could go to Starbucks, but you had no idea what you were drinking. When you'd ask for the list of ingredients, they wouldn't tell you. You'd call customer service, you'd email them saying, hey, what's in a pumpkin spice latte? I'd like to know what I'm drinking. Oh, that's proprietary. We don't give that information out. I'm like, wait a minute, your competitors like Dunkin' Donuts tell us what you're drinking when you drink there. Why won't you tell us? This is so crazy. You're a better for you, quote unquote, brand, a more, a higher end brand, and you're not gonna tell me what you're drinking? I thought this was such a lack of transparency by them that eventually I had to just put on my investigation hat and go down to my local Starbucks. I went to a few and eventually convinced one of the baristas to show me the different back of the labels that they were using to make a pumpkin spice latte, and came up with my own ingredient list and published it on the blog. It went so viral that I was on Fox and Friends and other morning talk shows. And by the end of the week, Starbucks was removing caramel color level 4, which was found in the pumpkin spice latte mix. And I just couldn't believe it. You're drinking this product out of an opaque cup. Why in the world would you need a coloring agent that has a carcinogen in it? It made no sense. This week I got an email from Starbucks. I'm on their email list. And they show a picture of a farmer, and he's holding a pumpkin. It says, PSL starts here. It's a huge change from where they've been. They actually have real pumpkin in their pumpkin spice lattes now. But one of the problems with all of these different campaigns is they were winning the war on consumer education, but they weren't winning the war on regulations. These companies were still getting away with using these chemicals. Americans were still being poisoned. And so when I was asked to speak at the Senate roundtable this past September in 2024, I used it as an opportunity to talk about these products and show these examples right in front of my elected officials. And when I looked senators and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was in that room at the moment, in the eye and said to them, why is it citizen activists like me holding these companies accountable? Why isn't it our elected politicians like you in Washington doing this work? They agreed with me. They understood the situation we're in, and they all nodded. It was an incredible moment. I'll never forget it. The whole room went electric when I showed these examples, these side-by-side comparisons. I had huge poster boards of the full ingredient lists of McDonald's and Skittles and Doritos and Fruit Loops. And then at the end of my Senate testimony, I invited both political parties to Battle Creek, Michigan, to Kellogg's headquarters to deliver a petition to get them to remove artificial food dyes from Fruit Loops. Back in 2015, when I was doing a lot of this work, many of the food companies made the announcement that they were going to remove these dyes. But then they never did. They went back on their word, and nobody was holding them accountable. And so I started a petition. At the start of that Senate testimony, it was about 100,000 signatures. And by 3 weeks later, when I was delivering those petitions to Battle Creek, Michigan, I had 400,000 signatures to deliver and 1,000 people on the ground that met me there that day, mothers and children and other politicians and so many health leaders from across the country. It was an incredible movement. It was almost like Kellogg's was the poster child of this problem, this underlying root cause problem of how our food system and our regulatory systems have failed us. And it spawned a national conversation because shortly thereafter, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. took our unheard voices to the campaign trail and all the way up to President Trump when he became HHS secretary. And that's when Dr. Marty McCary called me and wanted me to be part of the announcement that they were making to ask food companies to voluntarily remove these dyes and make the commitment to do it. And since then, over 50% of the food companies in America, including some of the largest, like Walmart, who controls, 27, one of their brands controls $27 billion of the food in this country, Great Value, which I know probably everybody in this room knows or has in their house, because 90% of households have it, is removing artificial food dyes, and companies like Kraft and Kellogg's have finally made the commitment, and General Mills and others. So this is an entire movement now to get the chemicals out of our food. But this book that you have in your hands, that I'm so excited that Bob so graciously bought all of you guys. I think it's just so amazing that you get to read this book and you get to have it in your hands, because it is the playbook on what we're up against when it comes to what we're eating every single day, and how the food corporations and chemical corporations have prevented us from knowing the truth about what's been done to the food supply and how to heal our bodies. And I have a very simple 3-question detox at the end that I want to leave you guys with. And it's as simple as this. You don't need to be a nutritionist or a rocket scientist to know how to eat. You just need to ask yourself these 3 simple questions. What are the ingredients? Are these ingredients nutritious? Where do the ingredients come from? So let's take an example. You're picking up some bread at the grocery store, and you turn over the ingredients. It should be 3 or 4, maybe 5 max ingredients. If it's more than that, it's probably problematic. But the first question is, what are the ingredients? So you turn it over and you look and you see monodiglycerides, which is actually in a lot of breads today, because it's a substitute for trans fats that the food industry made. And so you say monodiglycerides, well, okay, I don't know what that ingredient is, but I'll go try to Google it and find out. And you'll find out that it is a substitute for trans fat that has minute amounts of trans fats. This is a very processed preservative that they put in products. And then you can ask yourself the second question: are these ingredients nutritious? Well, what do you think? Are monodiglycerides nutritious? Is it going to help your body perform and have longevity and help your chronic disease? No, it's not. So you can make that decision quickly when you find out the ingredients. And then you can ask yourself the third question, which is, where do these ingredients come from? And if you know monodiglycerides is made in the laboratory in a chemical factory, you can maybe make a choice and say, you know what, I'm going to choose a different product today. And that's how simple eating should be. It really should be, the government right now is looking at the dietary guidelines, and they're looking at redoing them and offering some other updated suggestions. If it were up to me, I would delete 99.9% of the pages and just say these very few words: eat more real, whole food. Food that has not been adulterated by the food industry. This work is so meaningful and impactful to me, and it's really just an absolute honor to be able to speak to a group like yourselves that are considering retirement, looking at retirement planning, taking on Bob's services. And I've thought a lot about my mortality lately as well, especially given all of the life choices that I've had to go through. And I truly believe if you don't have health, you have nothing. And I saw that in my dad, who just died a month ago, where the last 10 years of his life were taken from him because of chronic disease. The joy and the excitement of retirement was robbed from him. He was forced to retire because of his health. He didn't get to live his golden years doing the things he wanted to do his whole life. And when I think about that, and I think about the position that we are all in today, where we're alive and we can make choices, your cells are always regenerating, and there's always an opportunity to switch off the chronic disease cells in your body and start eating healthier, so you can give messages to your health, like to your cells, to start living the life that you never thought was possible. And I truly believe that you can do that at any age, because I've seen it happen. And we just have this fundamental choice right here, where we can take this information that we're learning today and make better choices, so that when we are in those last moments of life, that we have no regrets, that we did everything we possibly could to live the best lives that we can live. So thank you so much.
Vani has agreed to take a couple of questions. I'm going to start off. Is there a short list? I'm sure there's a very long list. Is there a short list of items or ingredients that we should all be aware of and alert to and try to avoid like the plague?
There's a lot of them.
Right.
I talked about many of them here tonight. So artificial food dyes, definitely. Anything with a natural flavor. So when you're turning over a package at a grocery store, 90% of the products out there have this natural flavoring added to it, or sometimes it's artificial flavoring. And these flavoring components are something that the food industry uses to hijack your brain, hijack your olfactory system, hijack your taste buds, so that you will eat that product. It'll taste better than it normally would without that flavoring, because it's dead and processed. And it kind of keeps you coming back for more, and so that you always tend to buy that product, and they make sales. And so this is one of the reasons why Pepsi has a robot that mimics human taste buds that they use to test products on, because they're trying to create irresistible products so that they can cause that addiction in someone. And this is one of the reasons why so many people are facing chronic disease in this country, because we're eating too many foods that don't have any nutrition in them. And so we're eating all the wrong things, and then we overeat because our body's constantly looking for that nutrition. So if you just avoid this one ingredient, natural flavor and artificial flavor, those two, they're basically the same ingredient. They're just produced differently. That will save you from these food industry tricks, where that label can mean thousands of different chemicals, because the FDA does not require, when someone uses a natural flavor or artificial flavor, to tell you what's in those flavors. And so it could literally mean thousands of different chemicals behind that one label you see on a product. So that's one that I just don't bring in the house. If I have a choice, it's very rare that I have something that with a natural flavor or artificial flavor in the house. And it would be something that, you know, be once in a blue moon kind of thing. But there are plenty of products out there, real food products out there, that are better for you and don't have that ingredient. That's the one I think is the one that will catch all.
I thought it was going to be high fructose corn syrup.
Well,
that's number 2.
It is.
Okay, how bad is aspartame in diet drinks? In my family, I don't too much, but some people in my family drink diet soda. Do you have a comment on aspartame or saccharin?
So aspartame and saccharin, sucralose, all three of those ingredients were actually in the MAHA Commission report, which is an amazing report that you can go read, that came out in May of this year from the government. And it kind of goes through all of the reasons why we have chronic disease. And it was a bipartisan report, and it talked about the different risk factors of different additives we have in our diet. And the fact that that made it into a government report was a miracle, honestly. But it was also very alarming, it should be, to Americans that the government's actually telling the truth about these additives. So these specific artificial food dyes, the way they're produced, they cause cancer in animal studies. So this is something that other countries regulate a little differently, and we have in a lot of products that are very popular here in America, like Diet Coke and diet drinks and energy drinks. And so this is something I would avoid at all costs. This is one of the reasons why we use monk fruit in my company, Vani's protein powder. Monk fruit is one of the low-calorie sweeteners that doesn't have these type of risks, according to data and studies. So that's something I would choose instead if you need to have a low-calorie sweetener as part of your regimen. Stevia, I would use very sparingly and find a really pure stevia substitute, and I wouldn't use it that often because there's fertility risk with that. I don't know if anyone here is looking to have a baby, but if you are, again, that there is that risk. So.
We hear a lot about microplastics these days. This past summer, my wife and I were on vacation driving in Tennessee and South Carolina. It's hot as hell, and every so often we stop at a Sheetz or a place to get some drink. And my wife noticed I had that outside in the heat, outside of the building, is pallets stacked water and iced tea and stuff, which eventually makes it into the refrigerator. But in the meantime, it's out in the heat. And so my question to you, because one of my daughters got us all drinking out of glass water containers instead of the plastic. So can you tell us, because now we're hearing that the microplastic is in our brains, and can you have a comment on how we can avoid or mitigate this microplastic story?
Yeah, they say it's close to a credit card size piece in our brain, in our bodies. It's really quite frightening when you think about it that way. So microplastics are coming from, obviously, bottled water, from plastic bottled water that leaches into the water. It's coming into glass bottled water too, from the caps and the processing of glass water bottle, unfortunately. It's coming from fast food packaging. It's coming from packaging at the grocery store. It's coming from the water that we drink. It's in the actual water we drink from the contamination of plastics in our society. So it's coming from all kinds of things. It's coming from seafood we eat. So this is something that will drive you crazy if you try to avoid, considering the way we live in this world. Now, there's a few things that you can do to mitigate your risk for this, and this is just what I personally do. At home, I make sure I'm cooking with stainless steel. There's an amazing company called 360 that I bought all my cookware from, and they even have a crock pot that's stainless steel, so I know nothing's leaching into my food. There's no forever chemicals from the Teflon coating or anything like that. Then I make sure that I have all glass containers for the food that I have left over and how I reheated it. I make sure that when there's a choice between the carrots in the plastic bag or the carrots that are not in the plastic bag, I choose the carrots not in the plastic bag. So you have to kind of make these daily choices, and then you're going to be exposed to it anyways in some way or shape. And so that's what eating whole, real foods will protect you against. Will protect you from the cancer risk of that exposure and the health risks from that exposure of plastics. Like eating cilantro helps detoxify the liver of all of those different compounds that get in your body. Other foods help regenerate your cells to fight off these invaders. So, that's where eating healthy and eating whole, real food will help protect you against these environmental factors that a lot of times we have little control over.
When I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago, you gave me the answer to this, but I think a lot of people have the question. It seems like the outlook for American food companies, it is getting better. And in late April, they had the HHS and the FDA announced that all petroleum-based dyes would be phased out over the next few years. And I said to you, what's going to take them so long? Why don't they just stop it now? And there's actually a very good reason. Can you explain to people why they can't do it right away?
Yeah, so when you go from petroleum-based dyes that are readily available, made from petroleum, and you go to a beet juice or a carrot juice, well, where's that beet and carrot juice going to come from? Well, they have to grow the beets, they have to grow the carrots, they have to juice the carrots, they have to juice the beets, right? It takes time to change the farming, really, and change the supply chain. And so there are companies that are really reliant on these artificial food dyes. I'll give you an example. You know, all of Kellogg's is just a $2.9 billion brand. But PepsiCo is ginormous compared to that. And one label under them, Doritos, for example, is twice the size of Kellogg's, the entire brand of Kellogg's. Just Doritos is a $5 billion brand. So that's just an enormous amount of product that they have to change. It's in every grocery store, it's in every convenience shop, it's on every gas station, it's in every vending machine. It's got a long shelf life. The shelf life is over a year in some cases, maybe even a year and a half. They have to wait till that product expires and gets off the shelf from an economic standpoint to just avoid, you know, an economic problem for all of the shareholders. So there's multiple reasons why it takes a long time. Yes?
Is anybody doing anything about getting Roundup out of our foods?
Yes, so Roundup in our foods is something that's very problematic. It's being sprayed on 70 to 80% of our food in this country. Not just genetically engineered corn and soy and canola, but it's sprayed before harvest of almonds and oats and wheat. And this is something that is implicated to cause cancer in court cases across America. This is something that many activists, including myself, have been working on getting attention in Washington. Thankfully, we have someone like RFK Jr. at the head of HHS that is looking at the food chemicals and knows about the concerns of Roundup because he tried the historic landmark case that awarded a plaintiff billions of dollars showing that glyphosate caused cancer. So he understands the risks. But he's also only one cabinet member in Washington. So you've also got, you know, Secretary Brooke Rollins and you've got Secretary Lee Zeldin who have different constituents, have different goals. And even though they say they're MAHA, they also have their own people that they need to make happy. And so, you know, what I always like to say is it would be great, just roll them right under HHS, it'd be great, we get a lot done. But the problem with that is that we're dealing with the realities of the bureaucracy in Washington. And so I think the most impactful thing that can happen with chemical reform, especially chemical reform like Roundup, needs to happen at the state level. It can happen faster and it can be more meaningful. And that is actually what's been working so well with the food chemical reform is states like West Virginia banning artificial food dyes, states like Texas putting a warning label on 40 different ingredients, really pushing the movement forward. California saying that they're not going to serve ultra-processed foods in schools anymore. All of that pushes the industry forward because those states are so big. And I think if we could have some kind of meaningful action on Roundup at the state level, which I'm working with some states on, I think we can start to move in that direction.
My last question for you. I think I know the answer. I use, only for convenience, I use microwave oven to heat things up. And I'm sure you have some comments about it. You probably really like it when I put plastics in the microwave oven. Talk to us about the microwave oven, because in my family this is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that everybody grew up with, and it's a hard habit to break. But once you break it, you realize the food tastes better, it's more nutritious, and it's worth it. So in my house, we just use my microwave oven for my heating pad, and that's it. And so the way I warm up my food, or warm up my kids' food if they need something quickly warmed up, is a little toaster oven. Like, we have a little smaller toaster oven that doesn't take as long to heat up as my big oven, and I can warm things up very quickly in there. And yes, it takes a couple more minutes than a microwave, but it's a slower process. It retains more nutrition. You're not worried about eating microplastics when you put something in an oven. You definitely don't want to heat anything in plastic in an oven. But it's just, to me, is the safest way to avoid any type of chemical leaching, but also the nutrition of the food. Now, I get a lot of heat for this, but I'll share it anyways. It was mentioned on John Oliver when they made fun of me recently. Yeah, I made an episode of John Oliver. It was really quite funny. But there's this book from Dr. Emoto from Japan, where he looked at water crystals of different energy that you would direct at the water crystals under a microscope. So he would, for example, take a glass of water and say, "I love you" to it every day, and then he would look at the water crystals, and they were beautiful, and they looked like snowflakes, and they were gorgeous. And then he took another glass of water and said, "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." And he would look at the water crystals of that water, and it was ugly and terrible looking. And this was something that he did with all realms of energy that you would direct at different things. And he did this with microwaves. He saw what happened under a microscope when you microwaved water. And it was just one of those anecdotal things that stood out to me when I was reading this book on energy. And it was a New York Times bestseller. You know, this guy has been very famous in the metaphysical woo-woo space, right? But after seeing the side-by-side images of that, I was like, you know, maybe this guy has something to, you know, maybe there's something to do with this microwave thing, so.
Okay, Vani will take a couple more questions.
Sure.
And then she's going to be in the back signing books while you get your food or after you get your food, so a couple more minutes.
Thank you, Bob.
So what do you think about shopping at Trader Joe's? Would that be a better thing to do?
So she just asked, is shopping at Trader Joe's a better thing to do? You know, shopping at Trader Joe's is really fun. When my kids go there, they get a lollipop, they get stickers, they have a great time there. But there's a lot of junk food there too, right? One thing about Trader Joe's is they don't allow artificial food dyes in there, which is really great. They've had that policy for years. They do eliminate a lot of chemicals. I don't think they use GMOs there either. So shopping at Trader Joe's is definitely a healthier option to avoid things. There's a lot of organic, affordable there, which is great. I don't like how a lot of their produce is in plastic, which is unfortunate. But I do think it's a healthier place to shop than a conventional grocery store.
Well, we did it years ago, you picked with your fingers.
Yeah.
Years ago, that was pretty nasty. But I said it did that, because it was bacteria. So I think that's why you have to plastic there, eliminates that, you know, people have germs.
I don't know if it's germs or if it's to get you to buy more. I'm not sure. Because when it's in a plastic, you can't buy just one green pepper, you have to buy two. I don't know.
But here's where you put the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
People put their bacteria in their fingers, and that's it.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think if you have a healthy microbiome and a healthy immune system, I wouldn't be worried about other people's fingers so much. You wash your vegetables when you get home, so yeah. A good question. Thank you. In the back there.
I'm retired now, but while I was working, I had bought in a loaf of bread because I tried to make like sandwiches during the week. I cleaned it up my office one day and I just stuffed the bread in a drawer to get rid of it, just to get it out of sight. Forgot about it. I found it 6 months later when I was cleaning out my drawers, and it was perfectly fine. And I decided to do an experiment, and I kept it for another year.
What?
It was a year and a half that this bread was in the drawer,
Wow.
totally, perfectly looking, unspoiled, no mold. It was incredible. That's scary.
Think
Is there
about
a
what
bread
that's
that
doing
we
in
could
your
eat
body.
these days?
So she kept a piece of bread in a drawer for over a year and it didn't mold.
What brand?
Everyone should do that experiment with the bread you're currently buying. And if it doesn't mold in a week, I wouldn't buy that brand anymore.
Year and a half.
Yeah, that's crazy. Anybody else?
647 and Harvest Price.
What about using an air fryer?
An air fryer, yeah. I love air fry technology as long as it's, not a plastic air fryer. That's a problem these days. I feel like there's a lot of plastic ones, but a stainless steel air fryer, I love that idea. I air fry all the time. I make my own sweet potato fries, and I'll air fry other like potato rounds. What else do I air fry? Sometimes I'll air fry Brussels sprouts. So yeah, I love the air fry setting on. And again, my little toaster oven, which I think is the best little appliance in my kitchen, has an air fry setting. So that's my air fryer, that's my microwave, that's my everything, right? Quickly, I can make things very quickly in there because it warms up so quick. Do you have a question?
Is it better to be a vegetarian from a health perspective than eating all these meats?
Yeah, so his question is it better to be a vegetarian than to eat all the meats and other things? Well, I think it's important to eat a lot of plants. I personally love a higher plant-based diet that's eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and then eating meat and dairy as condiments. But that may not be good for you, and so I think every human is different, and you gotta figure out what's right for you. But the key component that is the most beneficial with all humans is a non-processed food diet. When they did studies comparing different types of diets, the one that won out every single time was the non-processed food diet. The one that ate as many whole foods and fruits and vegetables and meats and cheeses as possible that weren't adulterated by chemicals.
Are there any energy drinks that are healthy?
Energy drinks?
And water?
Coffee?
Okay.
Yeah, I would just drink a cup of coffee, have an espresso, make sure your coffee beans are organic. You don't need any fancy energy drinks with a laundry list of chemicals, right? It should be that simple. Green tea, that's what I have in the afternoon. And the antioxidants and health benefits from that are amazing for longevity. Matcha, we have a true Vani matcha protein that's amazing, that has a little bit of a kick. So, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate being here. Really great talking to you.